Sweep up the hashes, get out the way. Prayers all bands in town come to play. Yeah.
Preservation Hall has been part of Ben Jaffe's life from the day he was born. Jaffe's parents, Alan and Sandra Jaffe, started the landmark New Orleans jazz venue and its famous band half a century ago. Today, Ben Jaffe is the band's creative director and resident tuba player. PreViews editor John Mark Raffis speaks with Ben Jaffe about the Preservation Hall Jazz Band's collaboration with the Del McCoury Band, which produced the album American Legacies. Jaffe talks about how he met Del McCoury and his rapport with the bluegrass legend. Jaffe also discusses the similarities between jazz and bluegrass and how the bands explored their overlapping repertoires to create a hybrid sound.
The combination of traditional New Orleans jazz and bluegrass might not seem like a natural fit to some people, but I've listened to the album many times and it seems to do just fine.
Yeah.
It's a great sound, but how did that project come about?
Well, it started back in 2009 when I first met Mr. McCoury. He came to New Orleans to participate on a album we recorded called Preservation, which was a benefit album for our music outreach program. And he came down and recorded a couple songs with us. And it doesn't happen often, or at least has not happened often to me in life, where you meet somebody and immediately have a connection to that person, something unspoken. And I think the feeling was mutual for him too. He comes from and has an amazing story and has a very similar respect for tradition, very similar to the same respect that people in New Orleans have for tradition and family. And you could sense that with him. And the fact that his children play music and their children play music is amazing. And even though Del didn't come from a per se musical family, his brothers played music, and Del came up under Bill Monroe and kind of considered him a mentor. So in some ways he had a very, very similar musical experience, similar to what you find in New Orleans, where younger musicians are mentored by older musicians in the tradition.
I knew that your parents were from Pennsylvania, so we like to take a little tiny bit of credit for Preservation Hall.
Del's from Pennsylvania too.
And Del's from Pennsylvania too. And in fact, I didn't know until I read it earlier today that your father was born in Pottsville.
Yep.
Was he raised there, or was he raised in Philadelphia?
Oh, no, he was raised in Pottsville.
So really, he was born just up the road from Del, who was born in York County, so they're not that far apart.
No, absolutely not. And they're very similar in age. In fact, when I met Del, a chill and a warmth came over me when I met him because it felt I had wished that my dad were alive to have met him and to get to know him, because they're cut from the same cloth.
How is it that bluegrass and traditional jazz fit together?
To me, it was never like a far stretch. The more I learned about bluegrass and the more that I understood about the music and the more I got to know Del's family, I was like, well, you all have very similar values and a very similar tradition that we have in New Orleans. The more both of us, me and the McCourys, explored the similarities and these threads that went through both of our musics, the more we realized that they really weren't that different. That the tradition in New Orleans is an African American tradition, and their tradition is, a white tradition, and that was probably really the only thing that we could really, besides that, in the geography of where the music came from.
And you're not just playing on the album, and I'm sure in concert, you're not just playing bluegrass and jazz. There's also blues, there's gospel, there's a lot of Americana music or roots music that people will hear.
What we created on the album was a hybrid of both styles of music. A lot of times what I find is when people do come together to collaborate, it's a jazz band playing bluegrass, or it's a bluegrass playing jazz. Bluegrass group playing jazz, instead of coming together and saying what is the role of each of these instruments, and where where does our repertoire overlap? And that's really what we explored. We found all of this repertoire that we all shared in common. A lot of spirituals and hymns, a lot of blues, a lot of songs. I mean, you know, it was amazing to me when we sat down to actually think about recording together. Yeah, and I started learning from the McCurrys that a lot of jazz standards are actually played by bluegrass groups.
So in some ways, it really is. You're kind of going back to the future. You're actually doing something that seems like, you know, an innovative collaboration, but in some ways, it's musicians for a long time ago would do covers from other genres, and maybe that was even more common than it is now.
Well, I mean, if you look at Miles Davis or any of like the jazz greats, a lot of things that became jazz standards were taken from Broadway or from film. And popular music, Tin Pan Alley, and I look at early bluegrass music. I look at Bill Monroe. A lot of the songs he was playing, or Earl Scruggs was playing, were popular jazz songs of the day. I mean, through the McCurrys, I learned that Bill Monroe used to come to New Orleans every year for vacation. I mean, it's inevitable that if you're here, you're going to learn Basin Street Blues. You're going to learn, certain songs that you just hear over and over again. And what he did is he went back and created this, an environment with different instrumentation and, different musicians sort of interpreting all of these songs that he had heard.
It sounds like you've learned a lot of things from Del McCoury and the other band members. What sort of thing do you think is the most important lesson that you've learned from performing with that band?
It completely shook my world up. I mean, I kind of had the same. I didn't really have an opinion about bluegrass music. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know its history, and I didn't know what the role of the mandolin or the bass or the guitar or I didn't understand any of it. I didn't understand why there was a violin or what his role in the band was, or what that the banjo player I didn't understand what each of them did. That's really, to me, one of the reasons that this collaboration is successful is because it wasn't something that was manufactured in a lab somewhere. It was something that when we all got together in a room together and started jamming and playing together and having this conversation, not just a word conversation, but like Charlie Gabriel, our clarinet player, says, we started having a musical conversation. It just made me realize that everything hasn't been done. That there's still music and there's still things out there that are ready to be created.
Any conversations about recording a second CD?
Yeah, well, after we recorded the first CD. We sort of looked at each other and we're like, wow, we didn't even get to half the songs we wanted to record. And as we would record one song, we were like, oh, wait, there's this other song and there's this other song. And we were like, my God, this is something that Ronnie McCoury and I talk about, is that this is something that could just go on and on and on forever, just like the old jazz albums where every 2 or 3 times a year jazz players would put out records of standards, and we're like, wow, this is we're creating like a new canon.
Well, the first one was a great recording, so I'm sure that if you did it again, it would be just as wonderful.
Tickets are on sale for Preservation Hall Jazz Band and the Del McCoury Band together in concert September 28, 2012 at Penn State's Eisenhower Auditorium. Order online at www.cpa.psu.edu or by phone at 1-800-ARTS-TIX.